Alright guys, so in this lecture I'm going to show you how to paint rust. So you're going to start out with kind of a iron or rough iron sort of look for your base. So I already have that part done because this is specifically on the rust part, and I already have a lecture on specifically how to paint iron or rougher metals. So you're going to follow that process, create fairly rough metal. Typically if something's rusty, it doesn't have a nice clean chrome finish, but sometimes, but most of the time won't be. So that's what we have here first. So I just have base, turn all these layers off. We have our base shape color, and then I did the next layer, which was painting this in the rough iron sort of style, as you can see. And I think typically using some cools, some cool colors really ends up contrasting nicely with the rust itself. So on top of those layers, you're going to be making a new layer, and this is a layer that we're going to do our rust on. Now I'm going to select this layer so that I'm not painting outside the lines. And you're going to want to probably select some sort of a grunge brush. It's going to be pretty difficult to do this with just a common round brush. And there's tons of free ones online. Just Google grunge Photoshop brushes or whatever software you're in, or you can make your own, but you're going to want some sort of gritty, rough brush to do this in. So I'm going to come to industrial, and there's actually a brush in Procreate called Rusted Decay, and that's what I'm going to use. So I'm going to have my brush size be about medium, and I'm going to start off with a orangish brown, kind of really saturated, darker color. And I'm going to come in and start brushing in some of the places where I want there to be this rust. So I'm imagining the lower half especially is going to have the most rust. And some things you want to think about when you're placing rust is that one, rust tends to accumulate when, it's the oxidization of the metal, and that tends to happen when it gets wet. So places where water would pool or collect or drip down especially are going to get it pretty heavy. Let's go even darker. And you want to keep that in mind as you're painting, that those parts are really going to get hit hard. And rust has a pretty wide variety of colors, from oranges to browns to reds, even sometimes a little bit of green depending on what kind of metal it is. So your best bet is really honestly going to be to take a pretty good look at some reference photos to get a good idea of how rust interacts. So we're going to move it into the orange, and I'm going to come up here to this Flicks brush. It's pretty dark, just to get a few spots of darker rust spots in here. And we can do this along the side as well in a few areas. Okay, and then we're going to go almost yellow. We're going to come back to our grunge brush, our rusted decay brush that we're using. Getting a few more spots around here. Also on the bottom side of this hinge, let's pick this more saturated orange. Bottom side of this will get some rust in there as the water collects and then runs down. Okay, and then we're going to go even brighter with this orange that we've got over here. You can color pick your own, and this is going to be really the brightest part. I'm going to bring my brush size a little bit lower, and these are going to be the areas that are collecting a lot and then sort of end up dripping down and causing these striations or streaks of rust in the metal. So it collect around here in the crevices of the bolts and then drips down the front of the metal to create this rust streak here. Same with the lock itself. Okay. And let's go ahead and bring it a little bit darker and kind of just go over that and knock it back a little bit. Some areas we could still let a little bit of that bright orange show through underneath. And then if you want to take an eraser tool, you can go back and kind of perhaps clean up a few areas. All right, there you go. And then of course I went ahead and added some scratches, which we can do that as well. I'm just gonna pick a darker gray color here. I'm just gonna switch to a pencil brush. Once again, you don't have to use the exact same brushes I'm using. What you're trying to replicate is the general overall technique and the idea of what's going on here. That looks pretty good, and then we can go ahead and hit it up with some highlights, which we can just kind of color pick ourselves. Bring my brush down and just catch a little bit of light along that edge that's reflecting up towards the light source. As well as those gouges that are getting picked up. Alright, that looks pretty good. And then what you can do is grab a little bit more rust on some of these areas, and using that same brush, just bring out a little bit more rust on some of those cracks, perhaps where water might seep through and collect. Some of those pock marks over time. All right, and there you go. That is how you go about painting rust. You can choose how much you want to go, how far or how little. It's totally up to you. And you can even, if we wanted to, you could get, if you look at reference photos of rust, you'll see that there's lots and lots of different variations of patterning for rust and how it can form. This is just kind of one style, but you can really pick up on that, and sometimes it gets a pretty hard edge on the rust, which you can replicate as well. It's up to you, but definitely look at reference photos, try out different styles. So that's your assignment, is to go ahead, you'll have the one on the left here to use as an example, and your job is to replicate that on the right and then post it in the Q&A. So that's it for this lecture. I'll see you guys in the next one.